Daniel number 1, Captives in a Strange Land.
After the city of Jerusalem was captured, the Chaldean army forced their Israelite prisoners to march with them on the long road back to Babylon. Even King Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, was a captive. Everyone was forced to march: strong young men, young women, old men and women, young people, and even children. Day after day, the great company of people walked on and on. They stopped only at night to camp by the roadside to rest from their weary journey. Each night as they made camp, the prisoners knew they were farther away from their homeland. When they finally reached Babylon, the Jews found that their new ruler treated them more kindly than they had expected. After giving them fields and houses, he let them work for themselves, just as they had done in their own country. God did not forget the Jews after they were carried away to Babylon. He sent them messages from his faithful prophet Jeremiah. God promised to bring the Jews back to their own country if they would obey him while they lived in Babylon. The people listened to these messages from God, spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah 30:10 says, "Therefore do not fear, for behold, I will save you from afar, and your seed from the land of their captivity." The Israelites longed for the time when they could return to their homeland. Even though the Chaldeans worshipped idols, the Jews refused to do the same. They knew how God hated idol worship. Now they wanted to please God. Often they met in small groups to talk about the land of Judah and the beautiful temple of the Lord that had been destroyed. They wept with homesickness. Sometimes the Chaldeans asked the Jews to sing for them. They knew the Jews were skillful musicians and had many beautiful songs, but the captive people hung their harps on the willow trees and refused to sing. "How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land?" they asked. David's beautiful songs of joy and victory would sound out of place in this strange country, and in their hearts they felt too sad to sing. The Jews carefully taught their children about the true God. They welcomed the priests and the Levites when they came to talk about the law of Moses. As the days and years passed, they did not forget the hope Jeremiah had given them, the hope of returning to Jerusalem if they obeyed the Lord. In Babylon, another man began to receive messages from God and to speak those messages to the people. This man was Ezekiel, one of the captives. He had been among the first to be taken prisoner. He had warned the people left in Judah about God's punishment for disobedience. Ezekiel saw wonderful visions from God. He encouraged the people to believe that the time would come when they would return again to their own land. Ezekiel 11:17 says, "Thus says the Lord God, I will gather you from the peoples, assemble you from the countries where you have been scattered, and I will give you the land of Israel." King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, ordered his chief official to select some of the young men that were strong, healthy, good-looking, and intelligent. They were to serve in the king's palace after being instructed in the Chaldean language and literature. These young men were to eat the same food that the king ate. This was intended to be a special honor. In the ancient world, there was a huge difference between the food enjoyed by nobility and what common people ate. The king thought that this rich food would help the young men to grow strong and wise. At the end of 3 years, these young men were to serve in the king's court. Among those chosen from the captives were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them different names. Daniel, which means God is my judge, was given the name Belteshazzar, which means Bel's prince. Hananiah, which means beloved by the Lord, was given the name Shadrach, which means illumined by the sun god. Mishael, which means who is like God, was given the name Meshach, which means who is like the goddess Shak. Azariah, which means the Lord is my help, was given the name Abed-nego, which means servant of Nego, a Babylonian god. The purpose of the rich food, the name changes, and the education was very simple. The king wanted to make these young Jewish men abandon their Hebrew God and look to the Babylonian government and King Nebuchadnezzar for everything. Daniel and his 3 friends wanted to keep the law God had given to the people of Israel. According to that law, there were some kinds of food they could not eat. When the food was brought from the king's table, Daniel saw that he was not allowed to eat it. What should he do? Daniel and his 3 friends decided they must do what was right. Daniel 1:8 says, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." Bravely, Daniel spoke to the guard who had been assigned to them by the chief official.
"It would be wrong for us to eat the king's meat and drink his wine. Do not force us to do this."
At first the official was afraid the king would be displeased if the boys refused to eat his food. Daniel 1:10 says, "And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, 'I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king.'" The guard was worried about what would happen if the men had a different diet than what the king had commanded them to eat. He was concerned that the king might even kill him for not taking good care of the young men.
"Try us for 10 days," Daniel bargained. "Let us eat good vegetables and drink pure water. Then see if we do not look as strong and healthy as the other young men."
Daniel's offer seemed fair enough, so the officer agreed. For 10 days he brought them vegetables and food that was permitted in the Jewish dietary laws. At the end of 10 days, the officer noted that Daniel and his 3 friends looked even healthier than all the other young men who were eating the king's food. From that time on, Daniel and his friends were given the food they wanted. God blessed Daniel and his friends with wisdom. In a short time they learned the language and wisdom of the Chaldeans. Daniel also understood visions and dreams of every kind. 3 years passed, and now it was time for the chief official to present the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar. The king interviewed each of the young men, and among all of them no one was found equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. In every matter of wisdom and understanding, the king found them to be 10 times better than all the wise men in his entire kingdom. So the young men began to serve in the king's court and continued to serve there for many years. Daniel and his 3 friends had obeyed God, and God blessed them with wisdom and understanding. There are many things we can learn from this lesson. I've thought of 3, maybe you can think of more. First, King Nebuchadnezzar used a strategy to make these bright, handsome, young Hebrew men forget their God. Satan uses a similar strategy against believers today as he attempts to indoctrinate us into the world system. Satan wants to change our identity as God's children. He wants to feed us what the world offers, and he wants to educate us in the so-called science of godlessness, which is evolution. Second, Daniel decided that he would not defile himself with the king's food for several reasons. The food was probably not permitted under Jewish law. The food may have been sacrificed to idols, and eating the king's food implied fellowship with or agreement with the idol-worshipping Babylonian culture. So Daniel made an incredibly courageous decision, especially when we think about the consequences of refusing to eat what the king himself had ordered them to eat. If you are ever faced with a difficult choice like this one, I hope you will remember this account about Daniel and will, like Daniel, have the courage to make the right choice. Third, take time to get to know God. Daniel and his friends knew God, they stood firm, and they took action. Daniel 11:32 is a great verse to memorize. "But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. You can get to know God by reading His Word, the Bible.